Good morning. Is this on? Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Middleboro. Here we are again. So a lot of us were here yesterday for a less than joyous event, but one that was very cathartic and very helpful to all of us who had been grieving solo. And it's always good to share those tough times as well as good times. And I think we accomplished that quite well yesterday. So serendipitously, today Sandy's talk is about transitions. It's very timely, and I think she's perhaps tweaked her talk a little to, well, we'll see. We'll see. So, Jeff, do you want to do the honors? You do it so well.
Had I been allowed to have a whole lot longer time, I would have tweaked more.
Yay! All right. Awesome.
We light this chalice.
In the spirit of love. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you.
All right.
Take it away.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. And quite honestly, I feel a tad overwhelmed and underprepared in the sense that it is a huge topic and more relevant now than I had any idea it was going to be. And because I started this because of a crisis of inner stability that I was having. I have a PhD in change and transition. I have lived in 8 states. I have had at least 40 distinct addresses in my life. I've lived in 6 of those 8 states in a 17-year span of time. So I am a master at deciding you're going to move or having a situation make you move, do the move, plant yourself where you are, and thrive. I have done it over and over and over again. And it's always worked smoothly. It's always been a matter of the signs and symbols and the messages. Natalie mentioned a little earlier that I possibly got a message today. The messages from my inner self and from Creator telling me, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to do it. Listen and follow it. And I learned to believe in that and trust that, and it has always worked. And it initially worked just fine here. Now, I'm a Western person. And when people would tell me, when I would say, I'm moving to Massachusetts, oh, you might want to reconsider that. You know, they're very provincial was a word that was used a lot. They're kind of stuck in their ways. They're not real warm. And these were people that had lived or been born in New England. So I, thought maybe they know what they're talking about. But I had visited a friend here already, and yes, it was a brief time, and it was vacation, so everything's always rosy on vacation, but I didn't find any of those things to be true. So I, as always, just thought, what the heck? I'm being guided to go there. And I came, and I stayed at the Days Inn in Middleboro because it was the only place I could find that would take a cat. And I needed to stay somewhere for the 3 or 4 days before my furniture arrived. I was moving here to live with my friends who own a house in Carver. And my friend, we've been friends now for more than 40 years. And we're like sisters. But we didn't see each other very often because neither one of us liked to fly. So when she happened to make a trip out west to see her sister, and she happened to stop and visit me, and it just happened to be a matter of months before my brother, who had been living with me for 6 years, died. He was an end-stage alcoholic, so those 6 years involved a lot of stress, a lot of wonderful memories, and a lot of closure for me because he had been my older brother. When I was born, he was 10 years old. So when we moved back to Texas after my parents divorced and I was a year old, move number 1, he was my daddy. He did all the things dads did. He fed me my bottle. He gave me piggyback rides. He's the person holding this screaming child looking at Santa Claus. So to be able to have him live with me at the end of his life when it was so difficult for him was really very cathartic and a blessing and a gift for me. So when she said, after he passed and after my ex-partner, who had been living with my brother and I as a roommate, moved to Ecuador, she said, look, you don't have any ties there anymore. Why don't you just come and live with us? Bruce said, we got a big house. Come back here. So I did. And while I was at that Days Inn motel, I didn't walk, but I came into town. And I loved it. It had that little town vibe. I loved the library, all the things I'd come to depend on in all of the small towns, the rural places I had lived. Now, I was originally a Los Angeles urban girl, so I know cities. And I had lived in San Francisco, and so I know cities, but I love little towns. And so it felt wonderful. It felt like a wonderful little town. And I lived with my friends then for a year, and I realized 5 people, 2 dogs and a cat, a little more energy than I wanted to deal with on a day basis. So I looked for a place to move. And I thought I'd found one, and then right as my furniture was arriving to be put in the apartment, the whole arrangement fell apart. So back to the Days Inn, me and the cat, for a month while my furniture is in storage. So that was very stressful. And I kept looking far and wide for the just right community to live in. And I kept coming back to Middleboro. And I kept coming back to Middleboro. And the lady at the laundromat, we got to talking, and she said, you know, my brother-in-law owns the house that I live in. It's up a few blocks from where the laundromat is. And she said, he and my sister live next door. And the upstairs flat is vacant. And basically, because he wants to make sure I'm happy, I get to pick who gets to live there. So would you like me to talk to him? And I said, sure. So I ended up living in this amazing Victorian, impossible to heat, but wonderful space. Just loved it. But I put my name into senior housing because I knew I could see the handwriting on the wall financially. And sure enough, in a nanosecond of time, which never happens, my name came up on the list, and I had to move barely at the end of my year's lease. Again, everything just falling into place. And I got a job at the library, again, falling into place. And that went on just like that until 2019. But along the way, I kept feeling something was missing. And yesterday, we talked about change and the change that happens when we have a death and the loss of a loved one. And it's that loss. There are things that are missing, things about the interaction that you had with that person, ways you structured your day even because of the interactions with that person. And that's a hole, that's missing. Well, I had almost that same feeling here. Something was missing. And I finally figured out it was my mountains, because I had lived in Montana and Wyoming and Arizona. So I missed my Bitterroot Valley, my Rockies, my Bitterroot Mountains, and I missed those wide open spaces because y'all got a lot of trees and it's very claustrophobic. And I kept thinking there'll be that open space I can find. And in all of my travels, you know, I didn't find it. There'd be maybe a little patch. I'd drive down 105 to look out over the fields in Lakeville, or I'd drive down Thompson, and if it's the right time in the season, you can see out into the field. But I can't just get in my car. I no longer have the finances to get in my car and just drive out to the Berkshires anytime that I need that. And that's what I started to realize as I kept spiraling down into those emotional signs of grief. I was getting depressed. I was getting a lot of inertia. Nothing was getting done around my apartment. I was aimless. I was trying all sorts of things, and none of them felt right. So I was just busy all the time, but never had a sense of doing anything meaningful. And that isn't to say by any means that the times I spend in the church I don't feel are meaningful, or the times I spend with you aren't meaningful. But it was a different thing. Nothing was falling into place with the same kind of rightness that I had learned to expect. And I was getting more and more depressed, and nothing I was trying was working, all my old strategies. So I happened to go through some notes in trying to clean up, and I came across a note about a book by William Bridges. It was written in the 1980s, and I had read it, called, and then they did a 40th anniversary, which is geared more towards personal interactions and changes as opposed to corporate transitions. So the book is Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. I checked it out and I started reading it. And one of the things it says is there's a difference between change and transition. And in our modern world, we put them as synonymous. So we think something happens and you're done with it, and then you move on to the new, whatever it is, the new beginning. We ignore that huge part in the middle, which can be very short, which I had a life pattern of my transition time had always been very short. I was able to let go of the old baggage and move on. But that transition time can also be very long. And that's the same process we go through when we're grieving the loss of a loved one. Our society tells us that there's a time frame. Okay, you get that 30 days, and then it's time to start moving on. Now, there are some cultures and some religions that still build in, you sit Shiva. We did a ritual gathering yesterday where we shared our grief, we shared our joy and our sense of how that person, what he meant to us, what he had left us in our lives that would continue. We shared that, and that gave us all a gift. And it helps us, even though each and every one of us in this room is going to go through this process differently, at a different pace. That sharing helped each of us prepare the soil of our being for how that process will go. And it will be a better process. So he reminded me that change is situational. There's an ending. And that transition is the psychological, emotional process of getting used to all the ramifications of that change and preparing yourself for the new beginning. And I hadn't done that. I was stuck. I wasn't used to that part of the process. I'm used to being that person that's a thrive where you're planted. And as I read his book, it started dawning on me, I wasn't that. That's a story I told myself. I was really a person who thrived where they were transplanted. So change and movement was a lot of my identity. It's a lot of what made me feel comfortable in life was starting overs, not staying with. And so I had to learn how to let go and dismantle and disengage with that old identity of myself that I didn't even realize I had. And so I started walking. I started asking myself questions. I started trying to sit with all the discomfort. And those are important things to do as you go through the grieving process. We are pushed in our culture to run as fast as possible from discomfort, emotional discomfort. We are told, get over it, move on, get past it. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. It's that discomfort, the sitting with it, the learning how to manage it that really allows us to do the growing we need to do. But you have to find ways to do that sitting that make the discomfort bearable and possible for you. So for some of us, it's having a familiar place to go and be with your thoughts. For others, it's doing in, thank you. There she is, taking care of us again. Now hopefully. Because I know how I am. For some of us, it's that coming together with other people and being able to share. For others, it's really just going into deep meditation. So whatever way works for you, use that. Don't push yourself into doing it the way people say you should do it, because there's no right way. There's only the way that works for you. So I started trying to remember to notice, to sit with myself and be open to those signs and symbols that I've come to expect and depend on. And so the first thing that rolled in was I was in Cordage Park. I was over by Cordage Park, and I started to drive home, and I just felt drawn to go down to Nelson Park and walk the Grace Trail. And it's the trail that goes along the old rail lines, and you are part of the time looking out on the bay, and there's a marsh, and it's and then you go into a canopied tree area. And so it's a nice, flat, wonderful walk. I've walked it many times with a friend, but not in a long, long time. And I just felt drawn to go there. And when I started walking it, I could see that they had put up posters that had the diagram of the walk and of the Grace Trail walk and the meaning of it. And I liked that they had sort of gotten it more organized for people. And there are lots of rocks along the way that have words written on them, like and sayings, like we know the Kindness Project. And they're all different sizes, but they're wonderful to read. So teachers have to have visual aids. So these are from a companion item that the creator of the Grace Walk, the Grace Trail, made. These are called the Hope Cards. And the Grace Trail was created by Anne Barry Joles. She made it, I want to say 2012, 2010, something like that, while her son was being deployed in Afghanistan, and she was so at odds with herself and so worried about him. So it is an actual laid out sort of path that is 5 steps, and they follow these words, and each word goes along with a kind of concept and has a question. So grace is gratitude, release, accept, challenge, and embrace. And at each of these points along the path, the idea is that you pause and you reflect on the question. So gratitude, what am I grateful for? Release, what is it I need to release? Accept, what is calling out for acceptance? And I like that idea that we don't accept it without it telling us what needs to be accepted. I sort of like that it's out there already. Challenge, what is my next challenge? Embrace, what can I embrace as possible? And then she's also got this, I like acronyms and things. Snap out of it. Snap, stop, and breathe. In, notice, and breathe. Appreciate, and breathe. And then participate in this moment. Snap out of it when you wish to connect with the joy of the present moment in any time. And I love that idea that the breathing can make you slow down and stop. And that's something when you're going through grief. Time starts moving either at a standstill or just like a freight train. And it's good to have a little quick reminder of how to pause and stop and notice. And so these are some of the questions that if you want to use the cards, you can take 5 of the questions with you and actually ask them. When I did the walk that day, I started it with what needs to be released for me to feel fully at home in this place, meaning where I live in Middleboro and where I live back here in Massachusetts. What needs to be released? And I started walking. And then I asked some of her questions, and I continued to ask the what needs to be released. And it was just such a wonderfully calming experience. I felt the breeze, and it wasn't really hot that day, and I heard birds, and I saw cute, funny little dogs, and people walking, and bicyclists, and so there's being in your own thoughts and being with people, and it was just a wonderful, safe place to be doing all of that delving. And I come back around, and I'm approaching the last leg, and I'm going to be doing the embrace. And as I get about 50 feet from where the clearing opens up for that marsh area, I sense movement. And as I turn, there is this flash of movement. And in the center of the road, about 10 or so feet ahead of me, is the biggest bunny I've seen in my life. And he turns to me, and I swear he does the, Alice in Wonderland thing. He turns, he looks, he kind of stands up straight, and then I hadn't taken anything, truly. I heard him say, or at least I heard a voice say, "So now what you gonna do?" And then he hops off. And I just stood there, and I started laughing because, like I said, I believe in symbols and signs, and rabbits represent, on the one hand, they represent fear, so you're supposed to look at, what am I carrying that's fearful? What fears am I refusing to face? But in this case, I knew this bunny represented new beginnings. And because it was such a big bunny, I was like, what is that? That's a jackrabbit. It looked just like a jackrabbit from Montana or Wyoming. So I Googled, naturally, because what else do? You Google. And Mr. Google said that you only have jackrabbits here in Massachusetts on Nantucket. So unless this one took the ferry and came here, this was in fact either a New England or an Eastern cottontail, but I swear, just the biggest guy in the world. And it just filled me with such joy, and it filled me with such positive energy that I came out into that clearing, and I knew what I was going to embrace next. I was going to embrace that if I couldn't find my personal sacred space here, like I had in Wyoming, in Montana, even in central Arizona, and certainly in San Francisco, if I couldn't find that yet, I could at least get in the car and drive down to Nelson Park once a week and walk the Grace Trail, because I felt that there. And so I had one step forward. And by the time I drove home and I was driving down towards my parking area, there's a big, huge tree at the end of the driveway on the grassy patch by the river. I live at Riverview, which is senior housing down by the Nemasket. And I've come to think of this tree as my goddess tree. She's really beautiful. Has multi-trunks and stands there all regal, and then she's all fully bushed out. She's the last to leaf and the last to lose her leaves. And so there she was, right at the end of the driveway, and I'm thinking, well, I walk this path all the time when I'm doing laundry. It's just a way to get out and get some fresh air and do some exercise while the dryer's going. This is a perfect grace trail. It's got that tree to start with grace, and then other trees and gardens, and I could actually do this walk in a purposeful, mindful way. And that would make this space, this physical space where I live, a little more at home for me. So I had another step. And then I decided, well, what's the next thing you need to do? If you want to be more in tune with nature here, and you don't really like it because it's too humid and it's got too many bugs, and you don't want to hike because there's ticks, and, I could find a million excuses. Well, at least get a plant. So I got a lobelia, which meant that every day I had to go out on my balcony and water it. Well, then I thought, well, you do all your stretches. Why don't you go do your stretches outside? You'd be in nature again. So then I have now started what reminds me of Bob, a practice. So I have my Greet the Day practice every morning, and part of it is a breathing that my other visual aid, one of the things I came across was notes for a book called The Seven Whispers by Christina Baldwin. And I used to recite this to myself every single day. It was part of my morning intention. but you get complacent. Everything was going well, so I stopped doing the things that really had helped it go well. And so I rediscovered her. It's a charming little book, wonderful. So one of the things she mentions is a breathing mantra from Thich Nhat Hanh. So it's breathe and say, let go. Breathe, be here. Breathe, now what? So I do that as part of my morning. And I do my yoga stretch. And now it's part of that transition, that working on transition by let go. What do I need to let go of? And every day, something more has come to me. Be here. Be open to all the senses. So I really feel the breeze. I hear the birds. I see the dragonfly that came and stood on the metal railing the entire time I did my exercises this morning. I missed all of that because I was keeping myself inside. I was keeping myself inside me. I was keeping myself inside my room. So then I do my stretches, and at the end of the stretches, I say once again the 7 whispers. And I've taken this as being, this is my intention for the day. This is how I'm going to go through my life living every single day. I'm going to maintain peace of mind. I'm going to move at the pace of guidance, which is really hard for me. I'm going to practice certainty of purpose, and this is where I'm kind of stuck right now. I'm going to surrender to surprise. I'm going to surrender to surprise, like the bunny, like that dragonfly. Like the Facebook post that came along in the early part of this process and said it was a picture of like a Zen figure with their arm outstretched and all sorts of little twinkly lights emanating from the hand. And it said, "Excuse me while I transition to the newer version of myself." And I thought, well, hello. So that's my screensaver. So every time I turn my phone on, I get to see that. 4, surrender to surprise. 5, ask for what you need and offer what you can. 6, love the folks in front of you. And nothing is brought to mind more with the death of a loved one than this, because we become so complacent and we know we love that person. We even if it's just an acquaintance, we know what that person has gifted us with their presence and maybe just something they said or a kindness they did. But we don't tell them. So I'm making a point now of going around and really conveying to people. And even in those moments where it's a stranger, really telling them how much that conversation while we were in the line at the grocery store, what that meant to me, how much it meant to have that friendly face and that nice voice. Because I don't want to have any regrets. I don't want to have anything left undone. And the last is return to the world. And that means get back engaged with everything. Engage your senses. Engage your purpose. And so I feel like now I have a structure in place similar to what I've used in the past. But I know that what I'm doing is I'm dismantling an old persona that has suited me for a very, very long time. But purpose has been the hardest thing for me to understand, that it's changing. Because I've always seen myself as, and aptitude tests have always shown that. I've always been a mentor, a facilitator, a teacher, a counselor, all of those things. That's not working anymore. So I've come to realize that maybe it's not only enough, maybe it's more than enough, that I just embrace being that aging, ever-increasing gray-haired crone, whether Bertha or newly formed Minerva, and that I acknowledge that I've gained a lot of wisdom over the years of experience that I've had, and maybe it's just enough that my purpose be using my experience and my wisdom wisely for myself to lead into this next new beginning of being an elder. And maybe once in a while I'll have the opportunity to share that wisdom with others. And so I borrowed something else from Christina Baldwin. She has a daily intention, and until I get a better one for myself, I'm going to steal hers. May all I do today contribute to the healing of the world, and I added, and Mother Earth. And may my heart be open enough to allow the world and Mother Earth to contribute to my healing. And so I will leave you with, this probably came from some workshop. It might have even been one that Vi and Bob did, because it has a very you sort of thing about it. It says closing words in unison, next session. So that's why I think it's a workshop. It's a prayer for living intention by Joseph M. Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. So thank you.